Part 1. The Codex. The dead didn't whisper, but in the sovereign ruins of Kalaris VII, Nyssa Vayne could have sworn they were screaming. The ruins loomed like the remains of a colossal beast, jagged spires rising against a starless sky. Wind howled softly through the cracks in the stone, carrying a faint metallic tang that lingered in the air. Beneath the cold, pale light of twin moons, the past felt uncomfortably alive. Nyssa adjusted her headlamp, the beam cutting through the shadows ahead. Her boots crunched over ancient debris, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the vastness of the corridors. Dust swirled in the lamp's glow, disturbed by her cautious movements as she pressed further into the labyrinth. Behind her, Harik stumbled.
This place feels cursed.
His voice echoed uneasily through the halls, bouncing off the walls as if mocking him.
Like it's been waiting for someone stupid enough to walk in.
Nyssa smirked, though she didn't look back.
Good.
Her voice was calm, steady, though her pulse quickened with every step.
That means we're exactly where we're supposed to be.
Harik grunted in reply, his unease evident in the way his hand hovered near his belt.
Sure.
He snorted softly.
Assuming where we're supposed to be includes plasma burns and buried bones.
The sovereign ruins weren't for the faint of heart. Most who ventured into them came back empty-handed, or didn't come back at all. The sovereigns had been a civilization of unmatched ambition, spreading their influence across countless systems. But they had fallen long ago, their empire reduced to fragments. Their cities and artifacts were all that remained, scattered across a galaxy that had all but forgotten them. But Nyssa wasn't here for scavenger scraps. She wasn't looking for artifacts to flip to collectors. She was here for the Sovereign Codex, a crystalline relic that, according to legend, held the key to the Sovereign's lost homeworld. For Nyssa, the Codex was more than just a prize. It was redemption. Her last expedition, a dig on Darcis IV, had ended in tragedy. Traps she'd overlooked had claimed the lives of 2 crewmates. Their screams haunted her still, an unrelenting reminder of her failure. The weight of that loss pressed on her now, even as she tried to leave it behind. Nyssa adjusted the strap of her satchel and pushed forward, her scanner in hand. The faint hum of the device filled the silence, a small but reassuring sound. The signal was growing stronger. They turned a corner, the corridor opening into a wide hallway. The walls here were lined with glyphs, their intricate patterns faintly luminous beneath layers of dust and time. Nyssa stopped, raising her hand to trace the carvings.
These marks,
she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper.
They're newer than the rest of the structure, added after the original construction.
Harik gave a soft snort, stepping back to glance over his shoulder.
Newer? It's a tomb. The only thing new here is us, and I don't plan on staying long enough to change that.
The glyphs seemed to shimmer faintly under her touch, their patterns almost imperceptibly shifting as though alive. Nyssa tilted her head, studying the carvings.
Do you hear that?
Her voice cut through the stillness, edged with curiosity.
I hear something that tells me we shouldn't be here.
Harik replied quickly, his tone sharp.
Let's just call this a bust and get out while we still can.
Nyssa pulled back her hand, glancing at her scanner. The device beeped softly, its readings unmistakable. The energy signature ahead was strong, growing more defined with every step. Her heart quickened.
We're close,
she said, more to herself than to Harik. She adjusted her satchel again and moved forward, her boots crunching against the ancient floor. The hallway gave way to a vast chamber. The air here felt heavier, as though the room itself had been waiting for them. Columns stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow, their surfaces carved with intricate designs that spoke of stories long forgotten. In the center of the room, a pedestal stood. It was sleek, smooth, and utterly unblemished by the passage of time. Resting atop it was the Codex. Nyssa froze, her breath catching in her throat. It was smaller than she'd imagined, a crystalline structure of interlocking facets that shimmered like frozen starlight. But its presence filled the room, a quiet hum resonating in the air around it.
This is it.
Her words barely escaped her lips, her voice trembling with awe. Harik lingered near the doorway, his body tense as he scanned the chamber with darting eyes.
Doesn't look like much to me.
Then you've never seen anything like it.
Nyssa shot back, her voice carrying an edge of excitement. She stepped toward the pedestal, her movements slow and deliberate. Each step felt heavier, as though the weight of centuries bore down on her. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above the surface of the Codex. For a moment she hesitated. Then she touched it. The Codex flared to life. Light cascaded from its crystalline structure, spilling outward in radiant waves that danced along the chamber walls. Holographic projections erupted into the air, spinning star maps, alien glyphs, and symbols that pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. Nyssa's breath hitched. Her heart thundered in her chest as her eyes darted between the projections, struggling to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just a relic, it was something alive, reactive, and impossibly advanced.
Nyssa?
Harik's voice cracked, the edge of panic clear in his tone.
I think you should step away.
The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, the soft hum that had filled the air now deepening into a resonant vibration. Nyssa glanced at the walls. The glyphs carved into the stone were glowing brighter now, their patterns shifting in synchrony with the Codex's projections.
Nyssa!
The tremor grew stronger, and a low rumble echoed through the chamber.
Nyssa grabbed the Codex, yanking it free from the pedestal. The moment she did, the room erupted into chaos.
Panels along the walls slid open with a sharp hiss, revealing sleek, spider-like drones. Their metallic limbs unfolded with fluid precision, and their glowing red eyes locked onto her with mechanical purpose.
Run!
Nyssa's shout echoed through the chamber as the drones sprang to life. They moved with unnerving precision. Metal legs clicked against the stone floor as they scuttled forward, their sleek black bodies reflecting the Codex's faint glow. Red optics flared to life, fixing on Nyssa as if sensing the artifact she now clutched against her chest. One of them fired, a streak of plasma screaming past her shoulder. Nyssa ducked, the heat brushing her skin as she shoved Harik toward the corridor.
Go, now!
Harik stumbled, his boots scraping against the uneven stone.
I told you this place was cursed.
Keep moving.
Nyssa snapped, sparing him a glance as she followed.
Her satchel bounced against her side. The Codex nestled securely inside, but the weight of it felt heavier now, almost oppressive. Another blast seared the wall beside her, sending a rain of shattered stone and dust into the air. The drones were faster than she'd expected. Their legs clattered with mechanical rhythm, closing the distance with alarming speed.
Tell me you've got a plan.
Harik shouted over the din, his voice tight with panic.
Run faster!
Nyssa shot back, her eyes darting ahead to the hallway. Her mind raced. They'd studied the schematics of the ruins, but the layout was fragmented, incomplete. If the drones had been dormant this entire time, there was no telling how far their programming extended, or how long the ruins themselves would hold together under this chaos. They turned a corner, and Nyssa's heart sank. A collapsed archway blocked their path, the crumbled stone forming a jagged barrier that reached nearly to the ceiling.
Perfect.
Harik muttered, bending over to catch his breath.
We're trapped. This is it. We're dead.
No, we're not.
Nyssa yanked her satchel open, pulling out a compact device. The energy cutter hummed to life in her hand, its glowing edge casting faint light against the rubble.
Cover me.
With what?
Harik's arms flailed in disbelief.
Optimism?
Improvise.
Nyssa didn't wait for him to argue. She crouched in front of the archway and pressed the cutter's beam against the largest chunk of debris. Sparks flew, the stone hissing as it began to melt away under the intense heat. Her hands moved with practiced precision, though her pulse hammered in her ears. Behind her, the sound of the drones grew louder. Harik glanced over his shoulder, his face pale.
We're out of time.
Just hold them off.
Nyssa snapped, her voice sharp as the cutter carved another line through the rubble.
Harik grabbed a loose rock from the ground and hurled it at the nearest drone. It clanged harmlessly off the machine's metallic carapace.
Yeah, great idea.
He muttered to himself, grabbing another rock. The drones were nearly upon them. Plasma bolts lit up the corridor, scorching the walls and filling the air with the acrid smell of burned stone. One blast hit a column to Nyssa's left, sending a cascade of debris tumbling down beside her. The cutter hissed, slicing through the final layer of stone. Nyssa shoved the last chunk of rubble aside, creating a narrow gap just large enough for them to crawl through.
Go!
She barked, grabbing Harik's arm and pushing him toward the opening. He didn't need to be told twice. The two of them burst into the open air, the cold wind stinging their faces as they stumbled onto the rocky surface. Nyssa's freighter loomed ahead, its silhouette dark against the pale light of Kalaris VII's twin moons. Behind them, the drones spilled out of the ruins, their glowing red eyes scanning the terrain as they resumed their pursuit.
Get to the ship!
Nyssa shouted, her boots kicking up dust as she sprinted toward the freighter. Harik was already ahead of her, his breath coming in panicked gasps as he scrambled up the loading ramp. Nyssa followed close behind, slamming her palm against the control panel to seal the hatch.
Tell me you can get us out of here.
Harik wheezed, collapsing into the co-pilot's seat as Nyssa threw herself into the cockpit.
Better than you can run.
Her fingers flew over the controls, flipping switches and activating the freighter's systems. The engines roared to life, sending a shudder through the ship as it lifted off the ground. Plasma bolts streaked past the cockpit windows, the drone's firepower lighting up the dark landscape below. The freighter broke through the atmosphere, its hull groaning under the strain. Nyssa exhaled a shaky breath, her hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. But her relief was short-lived. The sensor array beeped, a single ominous tone that sent a chill down her spine.
What now?
Harik muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. A sleek black vessel appeared on the ship's display, its angular design unmistakable. The faint blue glow of its thrusters marked it as a Sovereign shadow ship, a hunter-class vessel built for pursuit and destruction. The comm crackled to life, and a cold, clipped voice filled the cockpit.
Freighter Gamma 602!
The voice was sharp, mechanical, and utterly devoid of warmth.
You are carrying stolen Sovereign property. Surrender the artifact, or be destroyed.
Harik paled, his hands gripping the edges of his seat.
We're dead, we're so dead.
Nyssa's jaw tightened.
Not yet.
She pushed the freighter into a steep dive, aiming for a nearby asteroid field that loomed just ahead. The shadow ship gave chase, its weapon systems lighting up the void with streaks of plasma fire.
Do you have a plan?
Harik shouted, his voice climbing in pitch.
Working on it.
Nyssa fired a series of decoy flares, the bright flashes confusing the shadow ship's targeting systems. The freighter banked sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding a cluster of debris that spun lazily in the asteroid field's outer rim. The ship shuddered violently as a blast grazed its hull. Warning lights flared on the control panel, but Nyssa ignored them, her focus locked on the path ahead. Finally, she spotted a large asteroid with a hollowed-out crater. She killed the engines, letting the freighter drift into the shadow of the massive rock. The ship's systems hummed faintly as it settled into silence, the glow of its thrusters dimming to near invisibility. The shadow ship slowed, its searchlight sweeping over the asteroid field. Nyssa held her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the controls. The searchlights passed, and after what felt like an eternity, the shadow ship drifted away into the void. The cockpit fell silent, save for the faint hum of the freighter's systems. Harik slumped in his seat, his face pale and drawn.
You're insane,
he muttered, shaking his head. Nyssa didn't respond. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the Codex. Its crystalline surface shimmered faintly, casting fractured patterns of light across the cockpit walls.
If they want this,
She murmured, her voice barely above a whisper.
it's more dangerous than I thought.
The Codex pulsed softly, its light flaring briefly as though in agreement.
If you want to uncover what happens next, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Chapter 2 is coming soon, and trust me, you won't want to miss it.